credit? No problem. My name is Matthew Kroll.
And we all have our loops. My name is Shahir Dowd.
And this is the only podcast about movies, specifically the film Backrooms.
Are we in a back room right now?
Technically, yes, of the apartment. But also, I was about to say, it is essentially something that is not, from what I understand, sort of like IP owned, because it basically came from a 4chan creepypasta.
Yeah.
So like multiple people have taken the concept of the Backrooms that and I actually think Kane Parsons actually took it from somewhere else. Like he did it and then made the first like super viral video of it, but it's not a property he owns. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not like a traditional IP sense.
Yeah.
So it's like, and actually, I don't know about this at this point, but like Slender Man.
Yeah.
I know there's been like, I think 2 or maybe even 3 films about Slender Man, because Slender Man is essentially the boogeyman, and no one, I think, copyright owns the boogeyman. Email us in at onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com if you hold that copyright. Yeah.
Or if you are the boogeyman.
Or if you, only email us in if one of those 2 things is true.
I would love the boogeyman to email us.
Yo,
and be like,
boogeyman, hit us up.
Boogeyman be like, just wanted to let you know that I have been fighting this in court for the last 20 years. Also, I'm going to be haunting your dreams this week.
Great. Hey, listen. And also, what's your Desert Island movie? Boogeyman?
Yeah. Wait, no.
It would be Boogie Nights.
Boogie Nights, of course.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
While I pull up the initial 4chan post that started this whole phenomenon, which started in 2019, when Kane Parsons was but a twinkle in the eye of A24's future summer blockbuster releases. And this was posted on 4chan with a photograph that looked very similar, eerily similar to the backrooms that we see in Kane Parsons' new film. And under it was a quote that read, "If you are not careful and you no-clip out of reality in the wrong areas, you'll end up in the backrooms, where it's nothing but the stink of old moist carpet, the madness of mono yellow, the endless background noise of fluorescent lights at a maximum hum buzz, the approximately 600 million and approximately 600 million square miles of randomly segmented empty rooms to be trapped in. God save you if you hear something wandering around nearby, because it sure as hell has heard you."
There you go.
And that is the origin of Backrooms.
Yeah.
And so following that 4chan post, Kane Parsons, or as I understand it, a bunch of people who actually posted like this 4chan meme took off, and people posted other backroom images and that sort of thing. It became a thing. And Kane Parsons eventually, at the tender age of 13, I believe, or even younger, started using Blender to make little visions of what the backrooms would be like, walking through them. He eventually made little viral short clips on YouTube that I believe has 70 million views at this point.
Yeah.
And then turned that into a web series that I think is probably what you're referring to.
Yeah, I think that this is the 2022 stuff that they're treating a little bit more like a film, but it is actually, it looks like 24 to 25 episodes. I've watched a few of them.
Okay. I have not seen any of them, and I purposely avoided them this week. I'm very aware of its existence, and I've seen I was aware that they appeared on Reddit at one point, and I watched like probably a minute's worth of the clip, and then I was like, and to be fair, I thought it was cool. I always kind of put it aside into a category of like, I will watch this later, and then never got back around to it. And then as the movie kind of came around, famously, Kane Parsons is now 20 years old. He was 16, I believe, when was given his A24 deal. And he has been, when I heard the announcement of working out, I kind of purposely avoided this, because I was like, well, I want to see the film on its own terms and just see if it kind of just works on me at that level. We will get to the Backrooms. We are living in liminal spaces right now and recording many episodes back to back. So apologies if I'm a little rusty this morning. But Callan is not, who wrote us in at onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com. Please write us in with your thoughts, comments, feelings, opinions, emotions, or where you are currently in the back room. Callan writes in, "Hey guys, normally I would never do something like this, but he's doing it now.
Oh no.
But on your Project Hail Mary episode, Matt was wondering why Ryan Gosling names the probes he sends back to Earth John, Paul, George, and Ringo, and why the Beatles songs plays during that scene. This is why. The type of probe the missions uses is called a Beetle model. See attached photo, even though I don't know how you can share an image on the podcast. Sorry for following up 2 months later on such minuscule detail, but it got stuck in the back of my head and it wouldn't leave until now. Much like The Wanderings of a Man in a Back Room. I mentioned that this was actually from the book as well, that they had called this. I had forgotten the fact that the actual type of mission was called
That's
Beatles.
so cool. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's a fun little thing. That connects the dot for me. Thank you very much.
You know, one thing I've thought about recently is there's been an increasing phenomenon that has been discussed in the last week, which is the box office success of two in particular first-time director horror features up against a Star Wars movie of all things,
Which is doing fine.
No, it is not.
It's not?
It is really not. It is Star Wars. So the metric that most films will use to determine their success isn't just the box office week, but is the follow-up week.
Oh, yeah,
and the
yeah,
second
of course.
follow-up
That's
week.
why Obsession was such a phenomenon for going up in its
one of
word
the few,
of mouth. Yeah.
very few films that
It
actually
did it
went,
3 weeks in a row.
Yeah, 3 weeks in a row went up. And, most interestingly, sort of random assortment of collection of anecdotal evidence is that Obsession is a movie that my physical therapist and everyone at the physical therapy office knew about and was aware of and wanted to go see.
Yeah.
Backrooms was less so. None of them talked about Star Wars. None of them were remotely interested. And so I'm talking a large spectrum of people who don't often go to the movies.
Yeah.
Will pick things selectively. All of them were ready and prepared, willing, excited to go see Obsessions. None of them had any interest in Star Wars.
Can we take 5 minutes to talk about that sort of conceptually?
Yes, because that's kind of what I want to get to here is that it's been interesting to sort of note that the box office has been largely usurped by small, independent, low-budget films. Now, admittedly, both of these is Obsession an A24 film? It is, I believe.
No, it's Blumhouse.
It's a Blumhouse.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, apologies for that. But Backrooms is an A24 film.
Yes.
These are production companies that have good distribution models
And good advertising.
and good advertising budgets as well. Yet Disney they're up against Disney. And remember the equation we talked about several years ago? I don't know if you remember this, but when it came to The Force Awakens, the thing I sort of talked about there was that it's impossible to avoid The Force Awakens. And Quentin Tarantino even noted it then that the sort of avoidance isn't just sort of like a feeling in the back of your head kind of thing. He talked about the fact that like independent theaters were essentially bullied not to play his movie, The Hateful Eight, at that time, because if they did, they wouldn't be permitted to have Force Awakens, which is a guaranteed money maker. That equation is entirely flipped on its head now because you have films like Obsession doing so well, and The Mandalorian and Grogu, I believe is the film called.
Yep.
Which has almost, in a weird way, and again, this is anecdotal on my part, has almost no cultural footprint in my life.
Oh, none whatsoever. It's 5 years too late.
And I have a 10-year-old in my house who has absolutely no cultural awareness of what this is. And then this week, interestingly, another major piece of IP is coming out, which is Master of the Universe.
It is.
And again, my 10-year-old son has no purchase on that as a franchise. I had to explain that to him, and he has no interest in seeing it whatsoever.
I sasaw it yesterday, and we'll do an episode about it. We won't talk about Master of the Universe today.
Yeah.
But no, I think it's super interesting. So if, Topam, especially...
But just sorry to interrupt, he does have an interest in Backrooms. He is aware of Backrooms.
Because Backrooms is an internet phenomenon, and that's where his friends live.
Without me telling him about it.
Yeah, that's where his friends live.
Is.
The generation now is more internet focused. The Backrooms is a ghost story on the internet. Like, that's what it is.
Yeah.
As far as the box office and The Mandalorian and Grogu, I've had multiple friends tell me it sure is the most milquetoast 5 out of 10 thing you've ever seen in your entire life.
This is from the director of Iron Man.
Yeah,
it's crazy,
I know.
Right?
And how the Favreau have fallen. But the interesting thing here is, if you'll remember back in the day, and the Topam historian I'm sure does, we, after the rise of Skywalker, I think you jumped on this because you can correct me when I'm wrong, but I was basically like, because of how much I was disappointed in the rise of Skywalker, I said I would refuse to review the next mainline Star Wars movie. Little did I know it would be 12 years later or whatever it is. Not 12 years, 7 years, 8 years, whatever it's been.
And I think it's there's a part of the reason why I have not made any sort of attempt at this at Mandalorian and Grogu is that it feels like an extension of the TV show, right? So it requires the TV show in order to gather some purchase.
But here's the interesting thing.
Yeah.
So yes, and one of the reasons and one of the things people have said is it feels like 4 episodes of that show bolted together to make a movie.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't even feel like it was supposed to be a movie. And then when The Mandalorian probably was like a cultural phenomenon during like season 2, again, years ago. Then they probably started moving this into production, but due to the way that everything moves around, like they just didn't have the bandwidth or the wherewithal to get it out in time, and now it's here. And it's funny because like Pedro Pascal, big actor, they take his helmet off again, hooray!
Yeah.
Which they're not supposed to do. But the interesting thing here is how who is the Mandalorian and Grogu in 2026 for? And I would argue that it is a children's movie for adults.
Right.
But and I'm not talking about like, oh, it's made for children and adults can enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about it is a film with childlike methodology for an adult audience that remembers these characters.
Right.
Yeah. And it's funny because I'm not going to talk about anything else about it.
That's exactly the demographic that The Force Awakens was tapping into.
But there's a difference. And I think the difference is The Force Awakens was such a special moment of going back home again that it moved the cultural needle because those adults then got their kids excited about it. And Star Wars still in kids' minds had a cultural cachet of like Clone Wars and like, I don't know if Rebels was out yet. I think it was. There was a bunch of like actual Disneyfied animated content about Star Wars. And, and this was something where because it was special to the adults, because it felt like something innovative or not even innovative, just something like because you don't get them often, they made it a cultural touch point for their families. And that got kids back into Star Wars in that way, along with those two things. Here, Star Wars is just an ever present behind it's like the fucking hum in the back rooms. It's just sort of around all the time and it doesn't feel special. In fact, the only special thing about Star Wars right now is when it bucks the trend and does something phenomenal like Andor, which is not a kid's thing. So like I never want a film to fail. I know a lot of people worked on it, etc. But I think that this is a sort of a wake up call, hopefully, to the people that make these larger things. Like it's not a guaranteed thing anymore. People, and I think it goes back to this too. Mandalorian and Grogu feels like something because you were sort of trained to watch the story on streaming. It feels like this is going to be a streaming movie. Like,
yeah, right. Yeah.
Like you could wait. It's going to come to Disney Plus. Yeah. And there's other cool stuff out right now. Yeah. So
and then I want to also just circle in that, which is that while box office is certainly important, we also, I'm really glad that we did Sophie Rombari's film, Blue Heron, which is not a box office, huge success or anything like that, but it does do really well. And it's great that we can kind of just, as a podcast, have a conversation about that movie in amongst these other two sort of behemoths right now. And I say behemoths in so much as the fact that Backrooms is the largest box office winner this weekend, still followed by Obsession and Star Wars and Mandalorian in third place, Michael in fourth, and Devil Wears Prada in fifth there as well. So I think it's fascinating. I actually, when we were doing The Force Awakens and what have you, I think you go back and listen to those episodes. That's my approach to those films tends to be, which is that they were ever present, impossible to escape. And my feeling was at the time, and I still feel this way, is that they didn't earn the cultural cachet that they occupied.
No, they cashed in on it.
Yeah.
That's the thing. And then you can only do that so many times.
Yeah.
So Force Awakens cashed in on that cultural cachet and ran a 10K with it. The Last Jedi, in my opinion, tried to do something at least somewhat innovative in the space. And it was divisive, but interesting.
Sure.
And then because Disney's such a large corporation, or a million different reasons why, they backpedaled and tried to go cash in on the cultural cachet again that they did for Force Awakens with The Rise of Skywalker.
Somehow the Emperor has returned.
Yeah, in Fortnite.
Somehow.
In Fortnite. And so, yeah.
But I like this. I think there's a couple of things that'll happen that I'm sort of curious about. One will be the immediate rush to YouTube to find whomever has any sense of virality in terms of a horror short. And this happened a few years ago as well, by the way. And the pathway tended to be in that situation. I'm thinking about the director of Lights Out, who eventually directed Shazam, would be, and it has actually come from James Wan quite a lot, who did make the sort of viral leap from a short film into a feature, Saw, and then eventually into superhero movies and bigger. But, like to take a filmmaker like that and offer them the opportunity to direct a big IP property, such as Shazam. This is not the case that I think Backrooms with Kane Parson, Obsession with Kari Barker, and I would really hope, in some way, the wake of their success be an opportunity for someone like Sophie Verambari to like find purchase in other stories that she wants to tell. I doubt very much that people are asking them to do asking her to do franchises. I know Kari Barker has the Texas Chainsaw Massacre coming up and has a first look deal that is unreal at this point.
Yep.
It kind of feels like when Jordan Peele came out in terms of like the cultural awakening of like a potential new talent. So I hope that opens the conversation. My concern is that what we're going to see is a bunch of YouTube inspired or YouTube shorts that have been converted into feature films, as opposed to what I think the heart of this is that audiences are looking for interesting new stories in order to justify the expense, the extraordinary expense of having to go to the movies. And what Obsessions did in all three of these cases, what Obsessions did particularly well is it not only justified the price point, it justified the experience of watching the movie in a theater with other people.
Sure.
And that's and I hope that studios and people that are making financial decisions are looking at it in that respect. Sorry, I know you want to jump in here. I say this because Spielberg has a movie coming out in a few weeks' time, and I know that enthusiasm for Disclosure Day, despite the initial reviews being excellent, is a little bit hard to muster. And Spielberg is an old guard kind of filmmaker. Master of the Universe is coming out with Stephen Knight at the helm, and that really does feel like a large manufactured property. It was part of the deal that Mattel made to produce two films based on their IP in a large way, and one of them was extraordinarily successful, and that was Barbie.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't feel like Master of the Universe is going to tap into the same sort of like cultural phenomenon that Barbie as a feature film was going to do.
And I'll tell you why next time.
Yeah. So I'm really excited in terms of like the movie going experience being the center of this conversation.
Here's the interesting thing too. It feels like, where the home for big budget IP is now? Streaming.
Yeah.
Like this is a year where there is a Spider-Man movie and an Avengers movie coming out.
And I feel the same way about them as I feel about Master of the Universe. Now I'm predisposed to that.
And there's no true hype for it. Yeah. Like it's really odd to feel. And I think it's just because it's exhausting. It's not like superhero fatigue, as people have sort of said. It's big IP fatigue. It's like, yep, we know. Okay. It's the thing. Cool. Wow. And like, I'm going to go see these. I'm going to hopefully like them. Master of the Universe was something interesting. And again, not going to get into my opinion, but it was something that at the very least, due to my history with that franchise, that I was incredibly interested in seeing.
Right.
But like, for instance, my interest for Avengers Doomsday is just sort of waned. Like I liked the little teasers they did.
Yeah.
But like, you know what? I'm way more excited. PlayStation just had its direct, which is where they reveal all their stuff. They reveal the new God of War side story thing, which looks fucking amazing. But the Marvel thing that they did was Marvel's Wolverine. The Insomniac team who did Spider-Man is doing it. And that to me is way more exciting than Doomsday for whatever reason. Like it just feels like that's where my head's at.
And in the PlayStation world, I think the fact that First Light came out.
Oh my God!
And I think there's an interesting thing here, which is that First Light, the 007 film game that came out, a little entendre there in terms of being a film, I think is a real natural place for the Bond franchise today.
Yeah.
And I haven't played the game. I'm interested in playing the game.
Same. I haven't had time.
But I wonder if a movie came out that kind of emulated First Light. I know there's lots of talk about Callum Turner being the new James Bond right now, who just got married to Dua Lipa over the weekend. So
congrats.
Just like you about to get married, you guys share that in common. You could both be Bond. You could both be married.
We were supposed to get married on Taylor Swift's date, but that was a fake out.
Oh, there you go. But yeah, I wonder if, that sort of translation from cinema to game is a little bit more interesting. And then in this case, in Backrooms, game to cinema, like Blender animation to
and the idea of clipping or no clipping,
which is a very
comes from a video game and 3D model perspective place, which is something interesting to think about how our reality is functioning and all of that jazz.
In the midst of all of this, like I wonder, there's a YouTube creator by the name of Ian Hubert, I believe. I believe that's his name. He's a Blender creator who Kane Parsons looked to in terms of like, how do I learn about this world? And he makes the most incredible sort of virtual worlds with stories within them, and he did this series called Lazy Tutorials or Lazy Lessons. I can't remember what it was called. And they're incredible. They're really truly, like, I grew up on the Andrew Kramer sort of thing.
Yeah.
But
Video Copilot, baby.
But Ian Hubert does sort of like a sort of a modern version of that same thing, which is like, here's this incredible world I'm going to build. I'm going to show you how easy it is, and I'm going to show you in like a minute.
Yeah.
And they're extraordinary. And I would venture to guess, Kane Parsons has been talking about Ian Hubert on the sort of campaign of Backrooms right now. That would be a person to like tap into. And this also reminds me of many, many years ago. Steven Soderbergh was asked the question of what I would do if I was running a studio. And his answer was, I would find 3 or 4 of the most interesting filmmakers I could think of that have not broken out big. And I would offer them the opportunity to do what it is I think is exciting that they do on a large scale. And I hope that is the sort of outcome that we get out of this. I don't necessarily know if it is.
Well, it's funny.
But the fact that, you know, we're talking about Master of the Universe and Star Wars. And I feel like those movies are not going to hold well against Obsession.
It's funny. Yeah. The Star Wars is the shocking one. Master of the Universe is not a popular IP. Like, it's not Barbie. Like, yeah. So it has whatever it is, an uphill battle, regardless of early reviews, etc. I think Patrick Willems, our friend of the show, just did I think 2 videos ago, did a sort of like music video director retrospective and what happened to music videos. Mm-hmm. And essentially because that's where directorial and filmmaker talent was sort of found a lot of the time back in the day.
Yeah.
And the truth is, essentially, that is now, you don't look to music videos anymore. You look to YouTube. That's where short films and things of that ilk kind of live outside of a award space, right? Like, if you're looking for the freshest talent, you have to kind of dig through. And again, YouTube is too full. It is full of AI slop. It is full of bad things that real people make. It's full of the bad things that I make. It's so hard to find anything new and worthwhile unless somehow it just hits in either the public zeitgeist, which then like clicks on the algorithm and it moves up the chain. So it is very interesting to have that be that sort of the new testing ground for these things. But I do think we are in a referendum of why people go to the movies, specifically for the Backrooms.
Yeah.
When I went, it was at 4 p.m. on a Thursday at the 19th Street.
Oh, yeah. Why that particular
it was the only one, because actually, to be honest, I got tickets late, and that was the only theater and showtime that had a decent seat.
Okay.
And me, Patrick, and Jamie went.
Yeah.
And it was one of those experiences that had so many teenagers in it, mm-hmm. because this does feel like a very sort of teen-coded movie, mm-hmm. where they were just, and this is not like they're engrossed in the film and they're having a good time. This is like screaming, giggling. Someone would tell them to be quiet and they'd just laugh, like that kind of thing. And again, kids are kids and sometimes they're shits and like, that's fine. But the experience of seeing Backrooms for me reminded me like where it came from. Like, it had a real, to be perfectly honest, the experience of watching this for me, sadly, had a real chicken jockey vibe to it.
Okay.
And it's funny though, and we'll talk a little bit about the different moments here. But whenever characters would sit and talk, which I think, spoiler, it might be some of
large piece of that.
Yeah, might be some of the weakest parts of these movies, not in the content, but sort of how it's given to us. That's when they would talk, and so we'd miss plot points and any sort of emotional resonance that could possibly be there. And then when Backrooms creepy stuff was happening, they'd shut up and scream at moments. And like, it was a real 50-50 experience. I want to see it again because I do feel like a little bit of it was ruined for me.
Well, can you tell us what it's about before we jump into how we felt about it?
I absolutely can. The Backrooms, or just Backrooms, pardon me, is about, quote from the Internet Movie Database, after a therapist's patient disappears into a dimension beyond reality, she must venture into the unknown to save him.
Yeah.
That's kind of it.
It's odd that it's framing it as her story, which is not the way that the film actually plays at all. I went to our local theater just because it's around the corner for me. I could just duck out of the office and go at an early screening. I went to a 7:00 screening. There were people besides me, people who were genuinely, they were older. I will say that. I didn't have a lot of teenagers in the room, although, and interestingly, there was a child in the room, like who was the same age as my son and who was brought by a parent who clearly had brought them because they had watched the YouTube series before. And then after the movie, I saw that child kind of like holding on to their father, like outside the movie theater, as though the movie was a little bit too much for them afterwards. And I was like, well, I think that's probably the case, but interesting choice nonetheless. The child was not running around or anything like that. About in the Deadpool series or scenes or anything like that. But everyone at the theater seemed to be interested in what the material was. You know, like I said, my physical therapist was like, I'm interested in seeing Backrooms. And I overheard some conversations afterwards who were like, oh, that was really good and that was really interesting. And I have to go, I am actually against the general consensus on the really? Against the theatrical consensus on this. And the theatrical consensus being the people around me. I didn't feel like this movie really came together in terms of going beyond the mechanic of the back room. I think there was sort of an interesting conceit at the heart of it, which was exploring a space. Again, obviously a liminal space, like that exists in parallel with the individual space. And I thought that was fascinating. There was echoes of, obviously, and Kane Parsons has talked about this, video game exploration, like Half-Life, Portal, that sort of thing as well. A lot of the Valve games that I thought was an interesting aesthetic choice. There were, to me, sort of synonymous echoes with something like It Follows, the film that came out a few years ago, in terms of, like, again, liminal spaces, horror that exists within those things. And then, my brain, because, that's where I come from, was sort of thinking about Andrei Tarkovsky's film Stalker and Solaris, which are about spaces that observe human beings and transform them and offer you, ideas about humanity. And I was like, okay, it's interesting there. I don't think any of that stuff really came together in the film in a meaningful way. The most sort of interesting symptom of this, I think, was both the texture and the approach to the way that the character's trauma was sort of embedded into like their traversing the backroom space. We have a psychiatrist or a therapist who, as we reveal later through the film, has some past trauma of their own, and a architect who now runs a furniture store in the middle of, where are they? Like somewhere in the Midwest,
I'll
somewhere.
say Burbank. I have no idea.
Yeah. Who is divorced because of probably an a sort of degree of alcoholism, what have you, that discover these spaces. I found that both those characterizations, while interesting and like with two really, really amazing actors at the heart of them, did feel grafted onto the story as opposed to the story emanating from them. I felt like in particular, I love, I'm always going to butcher her name, Renate Renesvat. Renata Renesvat, who we love from The Worst Person in the World in her films with Joaquin Trier.
Yeah, Sentimental Value.
Yeah, and Sentimental Value. I found in particular, while I think she's a great actress, obviously Oscar-nominated actress, and one who has a space in this sort of world, oddly miscast in so much as I don't think the story and the writing gave her enough to kind of work with. By the time she kind of like accepts her fate through the machinations of the stories, and being specifically vague here, I was not registering it as an acceptance of fate as much as the actor was just being told to kind of accept things.
Oh, wow.
And I really found, as we got towards the end, I was like, well, there is a way for this story to expand into more meaningful territory, but I really don't feel like it's here.
Oh, see, I think it's funny. I disagree on half your points and I agree on half your points, but I think that those points that I agree on are actually positives. And I'll start with that.
Okay, sure.
I absolutely do think that Clark and Mary's story is bolted onto this thing.
Yeah.
I like that. Here's why.
Okay.
The Backrooms themselves is less of a story and more of a shit ton of a lore dump. And it's always survived, in my opinion, on vibe, which is fine. Elden Ring is a vibe a lot of the time. And the story is good, but it's hidden. It's all lore and it's whatever. This is something where I really, when I went to the movie, I was like, I don't want a lore dump. I don't want to know the secrets of what the Backrooms is, as it's a government experiment or that they found a thing or like any of I don't care, because the whole idea of this thing is it is a creepypasta liminal space horror thing that's not like, that's not supposed to make all the way sense, but what I want is clues to lead me to my own, like, oh, well, this is kind of how it works, I guess. Neat.
Yeah.
Because it's the John Wick principle. It's the second you explain the Assassin's Society and the Continental, it gets way less interesting. And so when the movie started, I was very worried because it starts with the company, I forget what it even is, that like is in the Backrooms series, in the hazmat
formerly
suits.
an MRI company.
Yes, that then has found this door and is now exploring the Backrooms. That's kind of the loose plot. I was like, I don't want this. The Mark Duplass character, Phil, I didn't want, and I was just like, no. And so I really enjoyed that the story of more the story of Clark than Mary. Again, it's funny that the Internet Movie Database says that Mary is sort of like the main character, even though they do jump back and forth to specific. Well, they only show her past. They don't show Clark's past.
Yeah.
And they come at the Backrooms from two different places, but I think the two different places they come from, essentially, Clark having a tragic, self-inflicted sort of backstory with either addiction or just not, his life is not going where he wants to, and feeling very trapped in that. To have that space be made up and trap him and sort of have that become his reality, and then, as we'll get into, sort of his culmination of what that means, I think worked really well for me in sort of an accepting of what that is. Where Mary's story, I feel like by the end, and after and Mary is trapped in her own way because she is a therapist who does self-help things, but even she, you can tell, due to her own trauma, like doesn't fully believe in what she's doing. Yeah. And when she finally admits that that's the case, that's when she's sort of her character is more freed than not freed, and then things can move about in the Backrooms in a different way. And I also really, really liked how the Backrooms themselves functioned as. I liked especially the one scene where the kids were talking through the entire fucking time, when they're both in the Backrooms and she is trapped, and we'll get into full spoilers in a second, but and they're having the dialogue of sort of what he believes the Backrooms are. It's, in my opinion, it is just enough information for your brain to latch on and be like, oh, well, if X works like that, then maybe Y, Z, and whatever. But the movie doesn't tell you that. Yeah. And I really enjoy, and look, that is, to be very clear, a narrative crutch. Like there is, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but it would be way harder to explain deeper of the Backrooms and have that be an interesting story than just tie it to what these two characters think this place is. Like, the rules could be entirely different than what they believe, but what they believe makes sense in their own situations.
So I just want to be clear, what I don't want is a lore dump either. What I'm curious about is how the mechanisms of the world work against the narrative construct that these two characters have, which one is an addiction, but it was also an architect, and one is a therapist who has this sort of trauma attached to them. And I think that in terms of how the Backrooms operates on a narrative level to talk to those parts of the story, that's where I actually think that the movie doesn't come together.
So we'll get into spoilers then, I guess, because we kind of have to at that point to talk through that stuff.
Yeah.
The reason why I think that it does work is, at the end of the day, in Clark's story, a lot of bad stuff happens to Clark in the Backrooms. He even essentially feeds his employees to it in a weird way because he becomes obsessed with it. And at first you're like, well, this is kind of weird. This doesn't, like, I don't like this. There was a scene, I think my creepiest moment for me was when I think that Nareen was the character's name, Nareen and Kat were the two employees. When he goes down the 45-degree shaft and finds his shirt.
Yeah.
I was like, like, it was just, it's one of those, like,
what was the shirt? I was trying to remember.
I forget what the shirt was, but it was a very distinct, white shirt with black text on it.
I remember what the text was. It was something like anarchist or something. I write us in only movie podcast. I felt like the whole week I've been like, what was that shirt? Yeah.
And I
also like that he wears it as a crop top now, which is very sign of the times.
Yeah. And so by the time we get to sort of Clark and Mary having a conversation sort of in the Backrooms, once Mary goes and tries to find him because he sort of disappears, the choices that those two characters make at that point tie the whole thing together. Essentially, Clark, like in his life, has taken the experience of the Backrooms and folded it in on himself. He doesn't want to change. It's comfortable here. He's comfortable in his own weird mental prison because it's safe and he doesn't have to grow or change, and things his emotions and his problems will keep lapping over themselves, but he'll be able to keep essentially blaming someone else for it, and it will repeat, and he can just live in that comfortable little blanket of sort of denial and stuckness.
Yeah.
Mary, on the other hand, essentially her stuckness is not only her tragedy, but kind of her life's, like, what she's chosen to do with it, which is, I don't want to say the word grift, but like she by the end of the movie admits that, like, her self-help stuff, she even says to Clark, like, I don't know how to help you. You want to be here. Like, there's nothing I can say to you that's going to change that.
She is tied up by him and being chased by him across the room.
And I think, but I think at that point, because first she's trying to lean on her profession and whatever she's done. Maybe she believed it to a point, and in this incredibly stressful thing, she finally breaks. She's like, nope, I can't. You are trapped here. And
and I think the key words that she says is that what you won't accept is that the reason she left you is because you whine. It's because of your whining.
Yeah.
It's you blame. There's always somebody else to blame for what it is you do here.
She changes, and it's funny, in that honesty of, I don't know how to help you. She says the most, honestly, if he was ready for that piece, the most
he
helpful.
Does. He accepts it.
Yeah.
He actually agrees to let her go at that moment.
Yeah.
After trying to dress her up as his former wife, by scalping the person in the room. I do like the idea is like, and the best part is you can eat them.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
And also I love the other three characters that are there. The big rotund gentleman, the woman, the redhead woman, and the lamp guy.
The rotund woman, I'm sorry, the woman is a repeated memory of his wife, right?
We don't actually, I don't think so.
But we've seen a photo of her and she does look like that person.
Yeah. But I like the idea of the other two specifically because they just seem like other two people that have gotten lost in the Backrooms and have been repeated and made. And like, I love the idea that this is going back to the sort of video game roots of all of this and the psychology. I'll say the pseudo psychology of the Backrooms, because it's not real psychology.
Okay.
Is the idea that, and this is a thing that actually kind of is part of like real psychology, is that like we are living in a simulation.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that we understand simulations, especially in 3D spaces and video games or 3D modeling, is sort of like, you have hard planes of where objects can't pass through, and then you clip through them to see sort of what's underneath.
Yeah.
And the idea that reality would have something you could clip through. I mean, even the way you enter this is just literally walking through a solid thing.
Yeah.
You're clipping through the wall. And the idea that our reality is sort of built on a infinite maze of our own memories of things is an incredibly interesting concept to me. And I just like the exploration of specifically the two very bolted on characters looking at their stories are, in my opinion, interesting, but not terribly complex. But the reflection of their stories and how they experience any sort of catharsis or change or not change due to the Backrooms basically being like, here's you repeated ad nauseum, I think is a very interesting concept. The second, my last thing is, I think the movie starts getting less interesting to me when, even though I did love the reveal of Pirate Clark, I thought that was so, because it's the thing he hates and he hates himself, and that's the thing that's chasing him. The second that Pirate Clark is chasing Mary and it kind of goes to like the final chase sequence, outside of some very fun visuals, I was like, okay, like I didn't particularly care about that.
Yeah, I think the Mary character is where this sort of how liminal space affects your psychology can operate. That doesn't feel fully formed to me. And I would be interested for you or any of the listeners to go. And I know, like, me pointing to a 1960s Russian film is probably like, not going to go over well to the people who like really love Backrooms.
Why? Why do you say that? Because like if it's helpful to look at the context.
I think the context of the space here that we're looking at is YouTube videos and that kind of thing. But I would really think both Solaris and Stalker, which are about films about these like unusual spaces that read human emotion and offer you sort of reinterpretations of the things you believe you want, but actually aren't the things that you thought you wanted. is a more fully formed version of what this story could be.
Without something terribly spoilery, and you can just say this is too spoilery and don't say it. I'm just curious, in those stories, do those spaces that make the spaces or whatever, do they have consciousnesses behind them, or is it never answered? Or is that
it's never answered? And you know, that thing is, like I said earlier, it's not a lore dump and it's not a mechanical dump that I want. In fact, in both Tarkovsky's those two films, which are long and you know, challenging to watch, none of that lore is actually ever explained.
Yeah. Well, I think listeners and people that like the Backrooms might like those sort of things.
Yeah, they may do as well. And the reason is that, for example, Tarkovsky's film Stalker. I've talked about this on the podcast. Several times
remember
before.
you talking about Stalker,
and it was actually turned into a video game as well. So there is a video game version of Stalker, which was actually pretty successful.
There's a video game version of Backrooms.
Yeah, I'm sure. But this is a spoiler for that movie. It is, you know, some 80 years old now.
Jump ahead 60 seconds if you don't want a spoiler for Stalker.
But the interesting thing there is that there's a space in post nuclear Soviet Chernobyl Russia. It may not be Chernobyl related, but in post nuclear fallout Russia, where your room where your liminal spaces, your liminal mind is basically turned into reality. So the space kind of offers you something that you believe you've always wanted. It's like a wish, you know, almost like a wish room kind of thing. And it's sort of similar to what's happening in Backrooms, which is that when you go there, the tragedy and the reason why people don't go there is that what people realize once they're there is it'll give you what you actually want, not what you believed you wanted. And the tragedy that happens in the movie that they talk about is a man went in there to bring his brother who had died back to life. You know, like that's what he really, really wanted, and was instead given a bag of money, and it forced him to commit suicide because he was like, this space understands my heart truer than I believe I've understood myself. And it's like, you know, like it is repeated that space in a sort of interesting, and the space becomes interesting. And in Solaris, which also does have a American remake by one of the filmmakers we mentioned here, Steven Soderbergh, starring George Clooney. It's a sort of similar thing, which is that there is this planet that can read your mind, sort of like a Star Trek episode in many ways. But you know, I think those movies manage to graft the sort of the mechanic of the world to the psychology of the individuals within it in a far more elegant way. I think coming back to Backrooms, the most successful and beautiful rendition of Mary's identity being like interpreted by the Backroom that I saw, and we're in spoilers now, but Mary as a child lived with a mother who was a shut-in, I believe, and we don't exactly know the full details of it, but she carries around like the sort of stone of
their handprints in their sidewalk.
This also been a big year for hitting people in the face with bricks, by the way.
You gotta go with the classics.
Yeah. But the most beautiful rendition, which kind of felt like in an odd way a very specific 3D modeling kind of approach, was that we saw the room that Mary occupied, and we traveled down layers of it to see it kind of broken into individual pieces until it became sort of a nothingness, a spot of nothingness. And I found that was like actually the most beautiful rendition of like understanding where she comes from and how the room, how the space is trying to reconstruct her or reconstruct the space in some way. But I found that like ultimately a lot of the questions and exploration around Mary's character is not answered or spoken to or discussed in any way other than we're hinted at a world that exists here. And I don't really feel emotionally connected to where the resolve of the film is in terms of her, you know, staying in the space or being reduplicated in the space.
I did, because when like I think the moment that's when the movie starts falling apart for me, is like we have that moment of catharsis, and then it's a chase sequence followed by a lore dump. Yeah. So like I get Mary's story. I do feel like it is complete and I got something out of it. But then the movie goes on for another 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And so that's where
and her acceptance of like, you know, when she's traveling down that sort of like closed and clay space where another character where the pirate is chasing her. I just, there was something about the performance that just wasn't reading right to me in terms of like, I don't feel like this is a moment where the character is embracing this as much as the film is kind of needing the character to embrace this. And I just wasn't there. Secondly, there was another part to like Clark's story that I was kind of like, felt like was sort of hinted at, begun, but didn't really get explored, which is that he's an architect. Like his desire is to be an architect, right? And I was like, oh, curious how one thing he can map the world, but the other thing I was like his ability to build and construct and reconstruct and recontextualize. I was like, oh, I think maybe there's an opportunity here for that, and it's not really. It eventually just becomes a thing about his hated self or something like that.
I will say, I think that the while I like the story that is told in the dialogue, a lot of the dialogue feels very what a 20-something-year-old would think a 40-year-old with trauma would sound like. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And I didn't want to articulate it that way because I want to be fair to the fact that this is a first-time filmmaker, and there are many cases of young filmmakers making stories about older people that are beautifully resonant. Paul Thomas Anderson with Boogie Nights, but
also
Sophie Rombari with Blue Heron.
I'll even say that didn't ruin it for me. I just clocked it.
But it did feel like it was grafted onto the story and from a place of sort of a surface level analysis. And the thing that was really hard is that you can see the actors really trying to work it.
I think, and I
love Chitwell Ifedro. I think he's incredible.
He kills that scene in the therapist office when they're having they're doing the role play, even though the lines aren't great.
I feel like what I felt like as I was watching it was that they were really trying to work it up. You're really seeing actors trying to work up material that they know is kind of half baked at that point, or it felt like the midpoint of a story getting to screen. Because what often happens in when you're writing or when you're putting scenes like that together is something like a distillation down to its essence.
Yeah.
And this was the midpoint where you're building up what is the essence of this thing, as opposed to now we've got it, now we understand it, let's distill it down to it's one line that understands all of us.
Yeah.
And I just felt like I saw the working process there, as opposed to feeling like I understood what these characters were going through.
Yeah. I was also distracted by a bunch of rowdy teens, which there's nothing that could be done.
I want to be fair to it's a young filmmaker, all that sort of stuff as well. And more than anything, I do think the film demonstrates promise.
I think it's incredible. I truly I think this movie has flaws. There's no question. I had such a good time in it, and I've thought about it a lot more. Weirdly enough, I think Obsession is a way better movie.
Obsession is a far more successful film.
Yeah. I've thought about Backrooms more than I've thought about Obsession, because I think the concept of Backrooms, whether or not it's delivered for you, the individual watching the film, is something that I resonate more with. The making a wish and having it turn on you, which again, I think they did that to the best possible thing, but it's not something where I'm like.
Here's the way I would categorize it. One is that Backrooms has a larger ambition about what it's trying to achieve, and I think a sort of correlation to the Blair Witch Project, for example, in terms of how that transformed horror and how we understand horror. I think there is more that is trying to be done with Backrooms in terms of psychology, and the thing here that's probably challenging is that Obsession is very straightforward about what it's trying to achieve, but it does so beautifully, and it really and in that particular film, the understanding of this, when you watch that film actually opens with a sort of similar thing, which is a character is explaining part of their psychology in a way to as a confessional, right? Sure. And the great thing about that particular film is that the remaining parts of the story, including the way that the myth and the lore and the horror component and the mechanics of all of that, feel like they're born out of the character's psychology, right? This, in Backrooms, I didn't feel that way. In Backrooms, I really felt like that it was the other way around.
Here's an interesting thing. I feel like they both did it. I feel like Obsession is more emotionally resonant. I feel like Backrooms is essentially structurally relevant because of what the Backrooms are. It's a more blunt force way of doing it, because that's I'm going to use this word poorly, that's the creature of it. The Backrooms, whether it's conscious or not or whatever, its whole thing is showing you very blatantly the slightly off version and then being recursive on itself. Whereas a well-written story is actually really like well balanced with what is going on internally with the character. It doesn't have to do that because it's not what its modus operandi is. Like, yeah, I don't know. I think
but for me, at any rate, the problem of Backrooms for me, and the reason why I don't think it's fully fleshed out or formed at this point, isn't the reveal of the mechanics or how the mechanic works. I understood all of that. What I'm saying is that, like we've kind of articulated here as well, is that we identify that there is something about the way that the psychology of these two characters feels grafted onto the mechanic as opposed to the mechanic originating from the psychological trauma.
Sorry, I do disagree with that slightly. I thought the initial thing you said was this from the structural point of the film.
Yeah.
What the Backrooms is supposed to be about and what these two characters' story is feels bolted on. Yeah. Not necessarily. I think they actually that is true from a structural perspective. I think what I really like is that it did manage to, with this very bolted on structure, make their psychology work with what the Backrooms, and I use it in air quotes, psychology is. I actually did think it worked.
Okay.
Again, that's totally fine. Yeah. And I can see the reasons why someone wouldn't.
Yeah.
I think I go to, and this might be, and this is an interesting thing about cinema. Even more so, I think it's more akin to music than it is to like video games. And I'll kind of explain what I mean here. When something is lacking in a movie, or even in a piece of music or something, depending on your own opinions, life experiences, emotional state at the time, I think and I guess video games do this too. Maybe it's all art. You can, if you are in the right space, it like those blank spots can actually be things that are meaningful to fill in for you.
Yeah.
And I do think for me, those moments that you're sort of describing of the things not feeling connected or something, I was able, like, I saw the blank space of no connection as an opportunity for me to be like, and like dive into it more and make it a little more about me, which in turn sort of tied to the actual themes of the movie. Like, so I don't know. I saw those. I agree with that they're there. I just saw it as a benefit, not a detriment, which is fine.
There's that quote I kind of told from a writer that I knew who said that the film exists outside the script.
Yeah.
Or in the blank spaces on the page, because that's where the audience fills in the gaps. I agree with that. I think also the sort of fundamental the danger of that is thinking that your blank spaces fill in for structural beats that are missing. And for me, there's a lot of Clark and Mary's story that doesn't get reflected in the way that the Backrooms operates. And I found that I was sitting there going, I think this is an interesting story. I think this is an interesting world. I don't think this all kind of comes together. And Obsession is just because we just did it, it's top of mind. But I would also suggest like It Follows is a really great example of this as well. It follows the anxiety of people having, what a venereal disease and sex means to people who are having it and how it shares and spreads. I think that metaphor works really well. Get Out is a metaphor about like an interracial couple and what their like dynamics of their relationship is and how the mechanic of that world particularly applies to that as well. The anxiety that person feels. I didn't feel that kind of cohesive correlation between the liminal blank empty spaces connected to the psychology that was set up between these two characters. In fact, more than that, to go one step further, which I've already done on this episode, I think that it really did feel like this will be the most hypothetical.
I love it. This is the movie for it.
Yeah, the hypothetical analysis, and it's nothing to do with the movie. It's the production. It feels like a producer coming in and saying we need to find some psychology for these characters, write a backstory for them. And then, but like the genius of like great screenplays is that backstory then is actually the engine of the film. And that backstory in this particular case didn't feel like this was the engine of the film.
I feel like it is the engine of the film, and the Backrooms itself is like the car. Yeah. Like I think so. The thing I really loved about it, thank you for bringing this up because it actually snapped the last thing I wanted to bring up. This is a movie or a IP or whatever that could so easily have been turned into standardized, like essentially like Hollywood churn rate horror movie, and it avoids that.
And I think that conversation we had about like IP and what people are looking for in IP is perfectly reflected.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
I think the things you brought up about Get Out and It Follows and Obsession, and when great horror ties its things together, I actually, despite the fact I think all of those movies' dialogue that we just listed are better written than Backrooms dialogue, I think at its core, both of these characters, both Clark and Mary, have incredible anxiety, like incredible anxiety amongst other things.
Mm-hmm.
And the Backrooms, I think, is a perfect visualization of certain kinds of anxiety. And I think because of that, and because of the mechanics that we slowly learn of what they do, being trapped in a loop of our own patterns that are self-destructive and recursive, and you can't get out of them. I do think that both of their journeys, even though they end in two different ways that those journeys can end, I think does really reflect well on the themes the movie is trying to do, even though based on the entirety of the IP, they have to bolt on I think the difference is we both agree that it's bolted on. I liked what they bolted on and where they bolted it on, where it feels like you see that they bolted something on and you didn't think that bolt on worked, right? Like
I think the bolting on of the
I like this phrase.
of the emotional weight that these characters carry, which is something that every film should do.
Yeah,
doesn't drive the film forward. It is.
I think it does. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. For me, it doesn't.
Yeah.
And I think eventually where it ends is particularly like hollow.
The ending's bad.
Yeah. It's just hollow.
It's a setup, right? Because the second that we get to the very, very, very end, and it's Phil, Mark Duplass talking to Mary.
It's not even that. Like, I don't mind any of that.
I hate that.
It's Mary's. It's the recursive version. It's the image of the recursive version of Mary that exists within the back room at the very end of the film, right?
Yeah.
I don't watch that and go, this is the natural endpoint for that character.
But here's the thing. But this is the great part. Yeah. That's not Mary.
We don't know.
But it's not. She is somewhere else, but the room remembers Mary because she's tied to the chair.
Right.
Like, so even though Mary escaped, bits of her are still there, like everything that gets trapped there. That's more.
But what does that mean to Mary?
There's two sort of reads to it. One, it could mean absolutely nothing, which I don't really like. The other one is she has actually left her trauma there. Like it still exists and it's still somewhere, but her trauma has clipped through reality, and because she has surpassed it, it is no longer with her.
And she did that by fighting Clark's trauma.
By admitting to herself during the scene that what she does is not help people. She's running from another thing and she doesn't know how to help. And she should essentially stop living her life trying to act as though she has all the answers and can help everybody when she realizes that she actually can't in certain situations. That's what I read.
You know, it's funny because we talked about that reading a few seconds ago. And I think that wasn't, to me, a sense of like, I have all the, I'm going to admit that I don't actually have the answers. I think that was the most tough love answer to give Clark in that moment.
But that's my point. That's the first honest therapy she's given him.
Right.
Like, that's it. She has, and it's again in an incredibly stressful situation, but she finally breaks the veneer of like, I got it all figured out. I'm a self-help person. I have this therapy tape that you can buy and da-da-da-da. Like, it's like, no, motherfucker, it's you. Like, she admits the sort of truth of what is going on, and it breaks her own cycle kind of through the truth of what's going on with her own life.
Does that have any relevance to her trauma as a child? Like,
I think it has to do with escaping from the loops that she keeps calling people out that they're in loops.
Yeah.
And she's in loops. She's in loops of essentially trying to fake it till you make it and tell people to get out of their loops. And then she finally breaks out of that one and is able to leave. And I like the read of her, like the version of her that is still in the back rooms. Like, if she did escape, that is her trauma sort of left there.
Right.
But that's up to interpretation.
But so my point being is that I don't, and you've probably seen a healthy skepticism on my face as you've been describing that, which is that I don't see that trauma that she has experienced in her life is expressed through the mechanics of what happens in this film.
I do. Yeah.
I really don't. I feel like there's pieces missing here. And
I think the dialogue could be better.
It's not just dialogue. Again, the visual moment where we see the breakdown of the space that she once inhabited and was trapped in before being like broken down to its minimal spaces, a sort of distillation of like fine ideas, I think is a really beautiful representation of that. But I don't feel like she's going through that. I feel like the movie is just showing us how the backroom operates in that moment. And I don't think
I kind of took it as both in a weird way.
But I don't think she's going through it in that in so much as that her character in that moment has no way of experiencing that liminal space.
No,
right?
but the way that the back rooms are constructed, and I'm using tons of air quotes that no one can see, is essentially reading that through someone's mind or their own existence.
But so, is it a two-way communication? Do we sort of get a sense of that?
But we also don't know. This is my point. Like it is a truly liminal space. It both exists everywhere and doesn't exist anywhere. So when you're seeing something like that, it can also be a representation of what she is experiencing while also being a physical location. That's why I like this thing.
Do we get that sense with Clark that is what's that he is experiencing this space? Or
no, because Clark gave up and stopped trying to think through it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I don't find that the narrative conceit of this character with her past trauma is driving the engine of
Free your mind, man.
No, I just don't. And I've given you examples of other films where it really does.
Well, it's interesting though, but it seems like the rules of that sort of like what those, and again, I have not seen those two films, so I don't want to.
No, but also Get Out, It Follows, all those other Obsession, like several other films where I'm saying the engine of the film is driven by the narrative conceit.
Oh, but I've given the examples of why I think that does work here. Do I think those other films do it better? Yeah, but I think this film also does that same conceit.
Okay.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to a little bit of structure, but a lot of scripting for me.
Yeah.
Because I think the bones are here, and I'm curious if a better script would make more people, yourself or other folks that this doesn't connect with, have it make it connect with.
I want to say one thing as well, which is that there's a particular style of filmmaking that goes on here, which is that, and like on the one hand, I'm excited by a new filmmaker and a new voice and all that sort of stuff, and I want to make sure that this is not articulating any pushback against that idea. But there was I found myself being the filmmaking style didn't have a lot of highs and lows, and instead what I found was like a really even tone that, in a way, with the spaces that they were depicting, with the soundtrack, with the way that the film was kind of like operating, felt like I was being lulled in, and I was like really having to wake myself up in certain points to go, okay, what is happening here? Like I'll keep going with this.
What I love about that is the Backrooms.
Right.
That is what the Backrooms does.
Right.
That is what the Backrooms does to characters who find it. Is it lulls them. And so when the movie does that for me, I'm like, I'm here.
Right.
Like, I don't know. And the weird part is it's not always pleasant. Like it's sort of it's a quiet nervousness. And again, I don't want every movie to be this. That would fucking suck.
Yeah.
But like to have this be there is just really cool.
Yeah.
Again, I like this conversation, and please email us in at onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com to let us know what side of the Backrooms coin you fall between Shahir and myself. It
doesn't have to be an us versus them or you versus me.
I don't think it is. I'm just curious where people lie on that.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, how you like the Backrooms is a spectrum.
Of the three first-time filmmakers that we have discussed in the last 3 weeks, Obsession, Blue Heron, and now this is to me the least successful, like the most evident of a filmmaker still having to find their voice, whereas the other two were like, oh, these are exciting new voices that have something to say, and I'm excited to see where they go.
I will agree with that as far as as with the finding their voice thing. Yeah. However, even though I think Blue Heron is a fucking masterpiece, I've thought about Backrooms more.
That's fine.
And it's totally again, that's topically. That's stupid. Yeah. Well, that's any individual.
Yeah.
So I do think that you are correct in sort of the other two filmmakers seem to have a better grasp on what their sort of cinematic language and voice is at this point. I also think it'll be really interesting to see Kane do something that is outside of this, because that will sort of be the tell on because I don't know. I feel like I've been this person and maybe you have too, or other people out there listening, where you get really good at one thing and you're really good at that one thing. And then when you do something that's kind of adjacent to it and you think you're going to be great at it right away, you're like, oh, I need to work on this more.
Right.
You know what I mean? And again, that's what art is. That's what learning is. But
in the sort of the conversation we were having about distribution, capitalism, all that sort of stuff.
Let's bring it back.
But what I actually like about this more than what I want to champion and sort of emphasize here as well is that we should give opportunity to filmmakers to find their voice through the films they make. You know, that James Gray quote that I talked about a couple of weeks ago, where he was like, no one could name me a single quote line from Aquaman, but you know, everyone knows exactly what I'm talking about when I say I made an offer you couldn't refuse, or something like that. He was also basically in that conversation, same with Steven Soderbergh as well, saying we should find opportunities for filmmakers to express their voice through the machine of filmmaking on a large scale like this. Because even if they don't bear fruit in certain cases, they allow a filmmaker to develop and find and eventually find their voice. You know, Soderbergh talked about those 4 films that he made post Six Lies and Videotape, which didn't do very well, which helped him find his voice, but he still made those films, and whether he sees them as success or not. I think Kane Parsons in this particular case, I would like go, hey, look, this didn't connect with me, and I don't think this is quite fully formed, but I think, you know, like, it's great that you made it. It's great that there's an opportunity for people to see it. It's great that it's financially successful as well. Like, within that sort of capitalist economy, it has actually found purchase in terms of like an audience, you know, being able to go to it and navigate it and interrogate it and figure it out. And then for that filmmaker to be able to like move from that point forward as well through like the sort of grand mechanism, because the sort of the worst part of the capitalism, or, you know, film as capitalistic endeavor as that we're talking about, is that it only it's like a backroom, which is that repeats recursive voices over and over again to the point where they become regurgitation.
Oh, look, did we get back to Star Wars?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the missed opportunity here, is like finding we did an episode about Megalopolis years and years ago.
I think it was only like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I guess that is year and year ago.
And Francis Ford Coppola had this quote, which was, you know, somewhat built in misogyny and sexism, but I'll quote it again here, which is like, he said, the opportunity for cinema isn't for a person like me who has had financial success, and I'm paraphrasing here, to make more movies. This is the worst part of this phrase, so I'm aware of that, so I'm saying it out loud. Is that he says it's for the fat girl in Ohio who makes a film on her own, you know, find an audience. And that's the way he phrased it.
He could have just said girl.
He's a person who's challenged with his weight as well, but he was like, you look, the articulation of the idea that he was saying was that essentially, and I want to say this, is Kane Parsons. It's the 13-year-old kid in their bedroom who made this thing that found an audience with it. And that is the opportunity that we should be striving for. And
that's what the internet does.
That's what the internet does. And there are opportunities for Sophie Romvaris to be born out of this. You know, like for people who aren't automatically suited towards this kind of world. You know, like Jane Schoenbrom has a new film that premiered at Cannes this week, which I'm sure we'll do because you loved I Saw the TV Globe.
Yep.
So the opportunity to find interesting new voices, you know, not just viral memes, and that's kind of what I hope comes out of this. But that requires, as Soderbergh kind of described there, like the willingness to lose money on things. Now, in this particular case, Backrooms is the most successful movie on the at the box office this week, so that's actually great. But you know, like I would love for like, you know, like. Yeah, and I'm glad that in that conversation that we had, Blue Heron was like right in the middle of that, and that is a movie that is not financially successful.
That's the sandwich I had this week. I was Obsession, Blue Heron, and Backrooms. Those are the 3 films that I saw in a row.
I think that's a great actual sort of set of films to watch, you know, like and that's where I think I would champion what Backrooms has achieved more than anything. More, and in this particular case, more than the film itself.
I'll champion both.
Yeah.
But yeah, this has been the only podcast about the film Backrooms. Shahir, when you are not becoming a recursive version of yourself dressed as, what would you be dressed as?
What would I be?
Yeah, you would be, what would you be? You would be like have microphones for hands. I don't know. Where can folks find you?
You can find my Edward microphone hands, like walking up to people on the street, like yelling at them. On my website, suvanova.com. That's SUVANOVA.com. Matt, when you would, I don't want to try the recursive image of yourself, but when you would be falling into a liminal space that is reading your terrible, terrible thoughts, where can people find you?
You can find me constantly walking into walls and getting the entrance wrong over at my website. Extra credits and extra history. By the time this comes out, I believe the newest things out will be Audie Murphy, written by Izzy of Be Kind Rewind, friend of the show, wrote an extra history about the history of Audie Murphy, who is a soldier in World War II turned movie star.
Right.
And the sort of dark story that he lived, and it's fascinating. So please go check that out. Also on extra credits, we have the rise and fall of the House of Xbox.
Yeah.
Essentially looking at the 20-year history, or 25-year really at this point, because I think the original came out in 2001, of sort of where Microsoft is in the console space and what they're believing in, and how they're kind of back to where they were in 2001, which is a really weird concept. Sort of it all folding in back on itself.
Opportunity for a Y box? Is that what
I mean, opportunity to try to reinvent the space that they are no longer a market leader in.
Yeah.
Even Asha Sharna, who is the new Xbox CEO, was doing some interview. It was like, we have 100 days to turn this around.
Yeah.
Like they're and I like it because they're like admitting like, yep, this is bad. We're gonna work on it really hard. We have good people on it. I'm like, cool, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you for being honest with your fan base.
Yeah.
Anyway, next week we're gonna talk to you. Ooh, wait, I have the schedule.
No, yeah, I don't know what
I know what it is.
I know what we're gonna record next.
So it actually is Masters of the Universe. The next canonical episode of this podcast will be Masters of the Universe. So look forward to that. Go see it. You have the power.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just have to see if you're too scared to use it.
In preparation, you could go back and listen to our was it Desert Island movie?
Desert Island movies. Yours F for Fake, and mine was Masters of the Universe, the 1987 version, which is getting a 4K release soon.
And it's also a film that you and I watched several times over as Kill.
I can do the whole thing. I know the whole script.
Yeah. I actually, maybe I will show my son that one before we go see Master of the Universe, because he has no purchase on the Master of the Universe lore. He tried watching. We tried watching one of the episodes of the revamped show, and he has no.
Well, the problem with that one is that one is continuing a story from the cartoon, and it jumps right in, and I could see a new person being like, "What the fuck is this?"
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's I still think the 1987 is a schlocky masterpiece, and I love it to death.
Yeah.
Anyway, we will talk at you next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.